guys, happy Saturday. Give me a second to get everything set up and make sure that you can see and hear me okay, and then we'll get started. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, today we're going to be painting this pretty little wintry snow globe scene. And I painted this a few weeks back. Occasionally I like to just assign myself the task of painting something for fun. And I enjoyed this so much that I thought that you might like to have a go at it too. So there is a template for this. It's in the description below the video. You can just print it off and cut it out and draw around it. It's an easy way to get it into your sketchbook. And this is sized for kind of this size sketchbook. There's also a little thing on there about a shield. Now this is not essential, and you'll see how we use this, but we're gonna use this to sort of mask off the background so we can make that globe nice and glass-like at the end. And this is just a bit of scrap watercolor paper that you can use for that. Brush-wise, we've got the regulars. This is my 1/2" angled shader. We have the size 8 filbert brush, the size 4 round brush, and the size 2 liner. So we've got a nice little selection of sizes to use there. I've also got a couple of extra things. My beloved white charcoal pencil, which makes a few of the small details nice and easy to paint. And then this is a fluffy mop brush, and you can see this is still green from when I painted this. This makes blending really nice, and you'll see why. And if you don't have one of these, I definitely recommend getting one. They are a dream to use, and they make blending really nice and easy. So for our colours for this one, we've got white always, and then we've got a selection of Prussian blue. We've got primary blue as well, Winsor green or phthalo green, they're both the same. Primary yellow, primary red, and then burnt sienna. The burnt sienna is a little bit for convenience. If you have your primaries, you can mix a brown, but I find a little tube of burnt sienna super handy to have around, just so you don't have to do a whole lot of mixing. So I've got my template here ready to go, and we're going to start off with that background. So on the palette first, we're going to want a little bit of Prussian blue, a little bit of the Winsor green, and some white. And that's enough now to just get us started. Okay, so we want our largest brush to paint this background first. And what we're going to do is we're just going to paint a really simple, just a background with not too much detail to get started with. I'm just cleaning my brush out. I've broken open a brand new brush for this. Look at this. It's the colour that it should be. All of my brushes slowly end up green from the phthalo green and the Winsor green. So it's quite unusual to see a perfectly clean brush here. So we're going to fill in this background, and what we want to do is we want to create a bit of a light source in the center. All of these colors are going to have a little bit of white in them, so it makes them nice and cloudy and it pushes them back in the scene. A little bit of the green and white there. This is going to be for that little bit of illumination in the background, and I'm just going to brush this on really nice and roughly. No need to be tidy here, and don't worry too much about going outside of your pencil mark. All that will get covered eventually. So just a little bit of green and white. We've created just a little path of light there in the background, and I'm only adding just enough water to this to get it off the brush. You can see like it's really dry. We don't need any extra moisture in there. And then adding a bit of the Prussian blue to the mixture. I'm going to start turning that green to blue. We're going to create this bit of light in the middle here and then darken it towards the outer edges. You can't go wrong with any kind of mixture of the blues and the greens here. I don't worry too much about the exact colour, just so we've got that bit of light in the middle and then a little bit darker at the edges. And I'm just going to bring this, I'm going to leave just a little gap at the bottom. Because in the center we're going to add just a little bit of white with these colors, so that we get so that we've got like a nice snowy patch at the bottom. I'm cleaning most of the paint out of the brush and then just grabbing a little bit of the white and just brushing that across the bottom. Your brush won't be perfectly clean, and that's okay. We don't mind that it's tinted a little bit blue or a little bit green. These become the shadow colours for our snow. And that'll do for roughly filling in the page here. So now I've got all this nice coverage, we want to blend it together into something that looks a little smoother. Now, if you have a fluffy brush, that's what I'm going to use, but if you don't have a fluffy brush, you're just going to take a clean, damp, angled shader like this, and you're just going to fuss the colours together. Very little moisture on the brush, and you're going to want to keep that brush as dry as you can, just fussing the colours together until they soften out. And you just take your time with this. If you find that the colour is moving too much, you can clean your brush off and blot it dry and then come back to it. Now if you do have a fluffy brush, you're going to want a little bit of moisture all over the background, just a thin layer. We just need a little bit of moisture to let that paint move around in. And then you take your fluffy brush and you just tickle the page, swirling it around in fluffy little motions like this. And those colours will blend together so beautifully and so smoothly, it's almost like magic. And we want to keep the brush nice and dry when we do this, so if you feel that stuff is moving around too much, go ahead and blot your brush dry on your paper towel. Or if you get a little bit of colour, too much colour in your brush, you can just go ahead and scrub that off. The drier this brush stays, the better it will work. And like I say, don't worry if it goes outside of your lines. And like magic, we have a lovely soft background. Now over this, we're not going to do anything super complicated. We're gonna just add a few little bushes, and we're gonna keep with these colors. So the blue and the green and the white. So I want a little bluey green that's just a little bit darker than the background, so it shows up. So it doesn't matter if it tips a little bit to the blue or a little bit to the green. We just want the blue, the green, and then a little bit of white in there to make it quite cloudy. This cloudiness in all of these colours is what pushes this layer back. So in the background here, we're going to add just some like little bushes, just some rough squiggly shapes either side of this light section that we've created. And these are just rough, really rough little squiggles. They don't need to be anything fancy. Just either side of that light section. And then I'm going to take the same colour and just add a few little tree silhouettes extending out into this light section. Just to give there something a little interesting going on back here. So with our rough little bushes, when they've had a second to dry, we can take a clean damp brush and just kind of soften them out into more rounded shapes. Again, just them little rounded motions with your brush. And then the back edge we want to soften out a little, just so it sort of disappears into the background colour. That way we don't have any harsh edges that we have to worry about covering. And it softens all of these details into the background here, into this kind of soft, misty background. And the more you fuss, the softer these details will get. And then over this, I'm gonna add maybe just a couple of little darker bushes either side. So for this, we're gonna use the same blue and green, but it's gonna have less white in this time. And I'm not going to do too much over on this right side, the tree is going to be there. But over on this left side, maybe add some bolder, darker bushes. Again, with just the same sort of messy, rounded strokes. And like we did before, we can pick out that top edge, but then down towards the bottom here, we want to soften that away into the background. Again, just so we're left with no harsh edges. Maybe bring these bushes down a little. Maybe I'll add just a couple over here. They might peep around the back of the tree there. And we don't need anything to be too precise or detailed at this stage. This just sets up our background. On the ground down here at the bottom, we've got this nice light area, but we can introduce a little bit of shadow in here too. And we can just add some of this darker colour across the bottom here, keeping these marks nice and horizontal. Add that colour, and then we can just go back with a clean damp brush and sort of soften it in, so it looks a little more like it belongs rather than just plonked on top. Just smoothing that out. In fact, you can take your larger brush and that'll smooth it out really nice and quickly. So the last touch of our background here is to add a few little glowing spots in the background. And for this, we want a small amount of white. And just focusing up this section of light in the background here, we can just add a few little spots. Of white. And I'm going to add the spots and then go back with a clean but damp brush and soften them in. So just fuss at them until they grow on the background. This makes them bigger, but as they dry, they'll look a little bit softer. And we get this pleasant little twinkle in the background. We can even add a couple of little bitty spots that we don't blend out. And at that, your background is finished. We're good and ready to move on now to adding the interesting details of our scene. The only thing that I am going to do before I move on is I'm going to add just another little branch on this to fill in that space back here. And I'm just going to brighten up this snow on the ground. Just a little bit of white on the larger brush. And I'm just going to pop it through this light area in the center here. as that paint runs out on the brush, you can sort of blend it into what's there at the edges. But like I say, nothing has to be too perfect at this stage because we're going to paint over a bunch of this yet. Okay, so now we're going to add our tree. And for this we want the burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is a great base for painting trees because it's such a lovely rich colour. And we can use the burnt sienna to create the basic shape, and then we can tint the burnt sienna towards warmer colours for illuminated wood, and we can tint it towards cooler colours for wood that's in shadow. And we can make this really dynamic shape like this. So just the burnt sienna to begin with, nice and easy, we'll create our silhouettes. And for this, I've grabbed my filbert brush. This is my favourite tool for painting trees because we can use the wide surface of the brush for larger bits of the tree, and then we can turn it on its edge for those smaller branch tips. And it means that we can sort of do it in one continuous movement, and we get a really nice natural shape for our trees. Now this tree is a bit funny because we're going to squeeze it into the confines of our snowy globe. But over here on the left, let's add a little stump. Maybe there's been an old tree over here that fell down a few years ago, and it's just the little stump that's left. So we'll just create this funny little shape over here. That's a little bit wider at the base. And then for our tree, we're going to make this really nice twisty old tree that curves around the top of the scene here. And I'm just adding a little extra water to the paint here. Burnt sienna is a nice opaque colour, so it can stand that bit of extra water, and it means that we can paint in these continuous smooth strokes to get that nice shape. So this can be whatever sort of fancy shape that you want. So just sort of start and bring it around and give it a nice little twist before bringing it up at the top here. And then we'll flesh out that shape with a little bit of detail. So we're going to split that bottom up into a few roots, widen the trunk of the tree here at the bottom. And make it nice and interesting. And we're gonna make this tree nice and twisty, but by adding the silhouette first, it kind of simplifies the process a little bit. We don't have to think about where all the twists and turns are going to go because we're going to take care of that in a minute. splitting that tree apart at the top and trying to pay attention to the branches getting smaller as they get further away from the main trunk here. And once you've got kind of the main shape, we can go ahead and switch to a smaller brush. This is the size 4 round, and I'm just going to use this to work on the smaller parts of the tree. So we want a little lantern hanging here in the background, so we need a little branch for that. So I'm going to add just a little branch sneaking across the middle here. And then I'm going to break up the tips of the tree just into a few smaller branches. You can use your liner brush for these little branches if you're more comfortable with that. And I'm going to add just a little branch down here at the bottom. So we have a fun little shape here to work with. And now what we want to do is we want to make sense of that and give it some character. And the easiest way to do this is to start mixing in different values, whether that's light or shadow, doesn't really matter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of yellow and primary red onto my palette here. And I'm going to mix these together to create an orange. That I'm then going to use with the burnt sienna. So a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red for this nice vibrant orange. And I'm going to take a little bit of that burnt sienna and mix it in there. So I've got like a dull rusty colour. And this is a great place to start with the colours that we're going to add to the trunk here. So with this, we want to pick out the lighter areas of the tree. And we don't need to overcomplicate this. So if we're going to have a lantern in the middle, then all of the light areas are going to be towards that edge. So on our stump down here, that's going to be sort of down this right edge and across the top here a little. And on these branches, this is going to be on the underneath. And I'm just going to start off with these long sweeping strokes. Maybe curving them in interesting ways on the trunk. We don't know how the trunk twists yet, but we need to add a few suggestions so we can kind of work it out. What I'm going to do is add some down here on the different arms of the trunk as well. And we'll bring them round and curve them on the tree. So if we add some of these marks, we can start to suggest the twists of the tree. And it doesn't need to be perfect. You see, I've got kind of these lines that cross. As I'm doing this, I'm trying to pick out where that tree is going to move and turn, because whatever we don't like, we can just erase with a clean damp brush. But we want to be able to see kind of what's going on before we have to do that. So what I like to do is just add these marks until I get a feel for the curves on the tree. Okay, so we've got these series of 3 curves that are happening here, and I kind of like that sort of twisting of the tree. If we carry that on and add another one up here, we end up with this nice sort of turn. And when we've seen that, we can go ahead and just take out anything that doesn't really support this idea. And doing it like this, it means that every time we sort of do a tree like this, we get a slightly different result. And I think there's something quite nice about that. So for the shadows on the tree, we can take a little bit of Prussian blue and a little bit of the burnt sienna, mix them together, and you'll get a dark brown. This is perfect for the opposite sides of where our light is. So like we added this on all of the edges closest to the center, this is going to go on the opposite side. And when we add this, we want to leave a little bit of that burnt sienna that we originally used visible. And that way we end up with a light, a medium, and a dark value. So the back of the tree here, I'm gonna make nice and shadowy with this color. Just weaving this in to all those nice places at the back here. All those bits of the tree that are away from the light. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of a lighter mixture. So this orange that I've got here, and take a little bit of white in there. And a little bit of the burnt sienna, just so we've got like a paler, warm brown colour. And I'm going to use this to reinforce where those light spots are. Just following those curves. And when you do this, if you're not quite sure where your marks should go next, then it doesn't matter where they go. The best thing about using this sort of technique is just get a bit of paint on the page. It's much easier to see what it is that you want to do in the editing stage than it is to create it in the first place. And by adding these different tones into the tree like this, you get something that's really interesting and really dynamic in your finished shape. So I'm going to clean off my filbert brush, and we're going to soften these marks together a little. And what happens is all of these colours, they just sort of smooth into each other just a little bit. Clean your brush off and blot it really quite nice and dry. And then follow those marks with just a couple of strokes back and forth, just so that colour starts to blend. And you can begin to see the form of the tree appearing. We've got these nice little shadows that sort of sneak around the back, and all of these separate marks that we added start to look like, you know, perhaps we knew what we were doing. I'm going to take a little more of that nice dark brown. And I'm just going to enhance those shadows wherever I think that they should be a little bit darker. I want to make this seam through here nice and dark. And then this band that comes down here as well. And then this one that sits just under this little branch. And then separate those roots at the bottom there with a little more shadow. And this bit down here. Just enhancing those bits that you like. And if there are bits that you don't like, well, just take your clean damp brush and blend them away, and no one will ever know. So we've got those new enhanced shadows in there. We take our filbert brush again, nice and clean and blotted really quite dry. And then same again, just follow those marks, just softening the edges ever so slightly. Just to make those marks feel a little bit more at home. So now we've got the basis of our tree, we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of moss over the top. And for that we want some green. I'm going to go ahead and clean this little bit of cloudy blue off the palette here, because I don't need that. So I'm going to take a little bit of the Prussian blue, a little bit of yellow. That's going to give me a nice green. We'll start with sort of a darkish green. This will be our shadowy green colours. And I'm going to pop a little bit of this Windsor green in there as well. It's a more vibrant colour. It's just going to give that green a little kick. And I want to work most of the paint out the brush here, so I'm just sort of squashing it flat on the palette, and it'll break the bristles on your brush apart, so you end up with these splayed bristles. And this is nice for adding a little bit of texture. So we're going to add some of this moss around the base of the tree. We're going to blend these roots into the ground and give the bottom of the scene here a bit of colour. So I'm just patting this green onto the page. Means that we get texture and colour in one stroke. Just hiding these hard edges where the roots come down. And letting a little of this green creep up that tree. Again, back here on the next root, just weaving this green around the bottom. Now we don't want to cover all of that white or the pale blue that we have for the snow on the ground. So take your time around the base of the tree and just make sure you're leaving a little of that white there. And then same back here. Just adding a little of that green around the base here. And then we can let a little of it come up the tree. I'm going to add some white to it here. Just a little bit, and a little bit of yellow. Just so it's not quite as dark. And I'm just using that same stippling motion, just following those curves that we've made up the tree. And then maybe there's a little bit of moss that's found its way up to the top here. And we'll just add a little of that in. Again, following those colour paths that we've created. So we've got all of this nice shadowy dark moss. Now we want to give it some highlights. So we're going to take some yellow and some white. And with this lighter mixture, we're going to sort of pick out the top edges of our moss. Again, just patting it onto the page, just picking out that upper edge of all these little sections. Don't worry if you get some clumsy looking brush marks, because we can smooth all this out. And up the top here as well. This just means that we've got that shadowy green there, and then we can also have a little bit of illuminated green too. I'm not going to bring too many light colours around the back of the tree here. All of that's nice and shadowy. And maybe we've got some moss that's growing on the top of this stump here. So we can just pat some just across the top. So if you take your brush and clean out the excess paint, blot it nice and dry, you can take this brush and use it to sort of erase, or blend would be a better term, any of your funny marks away that might look a little bit unnatural. And we do want to make sure that this is a nice dry brush. And we just sort of fuss in these little circular motions really lightly. It doesn't take much at all. And then any marks that were a little bit too harsh or a little bit too unnatural, just sort of soften away and mix with those colours that are behind. Now if you find that when you're doing this nothing's mixing, it's because your brush is a little bit too dry. So go ahead and re-wet it and blot it nice and dry again. You can't blot it too dry, but you'll find that as you blend like this, that paint on the page will suck the moisture out of your brush. So you do need to re-wet it every now and then. And I'm also going to take this clean damp brush and just soften these edges of green into that snowy ground. Just tiny little movements with that clean damp brush, and it takes those harsh marks and just softens them really nicely where this greenery is disappearing into that snow. If you find your snow gets a little bit green, you can always brighten it up with just an extra touch of white. Not much at all, just kind of blend it in. If you get a little bit that you want to just move that green around in, then that works great. Okay, so we have our moss. Now this is a snowy scene, so our moss needs a little bit of snow. And for that I'm going to use my filbert brush. And it's nice and clean because we're going to use white for our snow. And then I want to make sure, I'm just squeezing it with a paper towel. I want to make sure this is nice and dry because we want to create texture here. I'm taking a little bit of brush with no water added, and I'm just spreading it out on the palette, working it into the end of the brush. So there's very little paint in the brush, and what is there is nice and thick. And then we can use this like a dry brush to add a little bit of snowy texture on the top of the moss that we've painted. And for this you'll just trail your brush across the surface, creating this little texture that sits on top of all that green. We don't want to cover all the green up, but just that top edge of it, just where the snow's settling. We're just letting it dance on the texture of the paper really. And we'll do the same around the bottom of the stump over here. Now we've got a couple of spots where we want snow, but it's quite shadowy. And for that we want a little bit of pale blue rather than white. So I'm going to take, just next to the white here, I've got a little bit of blue there already. So I'm just going to take that and I'm going to use that to add the snow around the back of this stump here. Just for a cooler white, and then up here on the top of the tree as well. I'm going to take my round brush and use this to get a little bit of snow on these branches and across this stump here. Same again, we want a really nice dry brush. If you do need to add some moisture because your paint is really thick and sticky, it wants to be the tiniest amount so that we still get that nice dry texture rather than sort of brush marks. And just picking it across the top of here. Dragging it down the side of the stump, and I'm keeping it out of this darker area at the background, at the back of this here, where we've created those shadows. I'll pop a little bit of the blue, the pale blue there here in a second. And I'm just going to take this and tidy up the tops of these little bits around the base of the tree. So we've got these nice crisp white bits of snow sitting on top. And how much snow you add is up to you. Depends how snowy your little forest is. I'm going to brighten up this snow just around the front of this. And then I'm going to switch to the blue snow now. Mix up a little pile of this. And like we've done with the white, I'm just going to use that to brighten up the very top of that snow that's in shadow. Adding a little bit around the back of the stump there. And a little bit across the top here. We can also have some snow settling on the branches, and for the bits that are away from the light, we want this to be this nice pale blue too. So take your round brush or your liner if you prefer for smaller details, and we're just going to trail it along edge of the tree. And I'm just going to bring it around this back side. We get that nice little bit of snow, but we also get this separation of the tree from the background there too. I'm going to trail it across the top here. Any of these upper edges that snow might have chance to settle on. I'm going to just take that little bit of excess paint that's off the brush, and I'm going to use whatever's left in the brush just to add a little bit of snow settling on this curve of the tree back here. Just where the tree is leaning, maybe the snow has blown against this edge. So we can have just a little bit of that texture just settling on that back side. Maybe on the top there. So we have some snow. Let's go ahead and add a few little snowy plants. These are nothing complicated, just some little scribbly things that suggest plants. You can use your liner or your round brush for this, whatever you prefer, for these little bitty details. What we're going to do is we're just going to tuck some plants in around all of these little things that are in the scene. So some grasses or some little things that are growing a bit taller. And this is nothing that actually resembles a plant. It's just a small group of dots or marks, some tall strokes for little blades of grass, and we can just tuck these little blobs and marks around the bottoms of all of these bits here, just to make them nice and interesting. And pick areas where you're going to get good contrast. So I wouldn't want to add anything here because it would get lost in all of the white here, but I could add something here that was going to show up in this area, or even better, add something here that is going to show up over the background. So think about where stuff is going to be visible to get the most impact, because it's always such a shame when you paint something beautiful and you can't see it in the finished scene because it doesn't sort of show up well against the things that are behind it. So same again here, just little blobs and scribbles, and I find it best to sort of unfocus your eyes to create little shapes like this and just create the impression of shapes that look like what you're going for. You can paint small plants, but it's kind of time consuming, and for something like this I think it's fine just to add these interesting little details. And you can tuck as many of these in as you like. Just sort of keep them out of the shadows a little bit. If you do want to add some plants that are in those areas that are a bit more shadowed, like back here or back here, those we would want to add with the blue. Let's go ahead and do that. So same again, little interesting shapes and blobs and scribbles. You just have to trust the process when you paint little plants like this. Sometimes I find that the harder you try to make them look like something, the worse they get. So if you don't try at all, then they somehow seem to turn out a little better. So we have all of these plants. Let's give them some berries. And for that, we just want a little bit of primary red. Now this doesn't look like much when it first goes on, but as it dries, that colour will show up and be nice and vibrant. So just a few little clusters of these nice bright berries. There always seems to be such vibrant berries this time of year. And we can just dot these around. Weaving them into those little plants that we've added. Just for something nice and interesting going on here. Okay, so I've got one little branch here that I've missed with the snow, and that's going to be sort of a little bit more illuminated, so I'm going to use the white for that. Just adding a little bit of white on top of that branch there. Maybe I'll brighten this one up in the middle here too. Oh yes. The ones further out I want to leave a little bit duller, but then ones in the middle, I don't mind them being a little brighter. Okay, so we have our tree, we have our plants and our moss and a bit of snow. Let's go ahead and add our lamp. Now for this, we want a golden yellow to start with. So we're going to take a little bit of yellow. We're going to take a tiny touch of red to turn that yellow a little bit more golden. And then we're going to add some white. Yellow by itself is a really transparent colour. So we want that white in there to boost that opacity and give it some body. The downside of using white in colours like this is it kills that vibrancy. But that's okay because we need to paint over the background here, so we need that opacity. I'm just adding just enough water to this that it's going to come off the brush nice and easily because we're painting over that background, so we don't want to have to fuss. The more we fuss with our brush here, the more chance it has to mix with those layers that are back there. So we really want to get it done in as few brush strokes as possible. So that means we want a little bit of water in there so that it comes off the brush nice and easy. So we're going to pick a spot that is not super dark behind. This is why we added this light stripe up here. We wouldn't want to paint this over any of these darker areas. Although the light would look great with the contrast, it stands a good chance of mixing with the blue and creating a bit of green. So if we pick somewhere in this light spot in the center and we paint our little lantern shape. So I'm going for like a rectangle that's wider at the top and a little bit narrower at the bottom. And then just filling that in. Now if you're working with cotton paper, your paints are much less likely to mix through the layers when you do this than if you're working with like a smoother surface. If you do start to see some mixing happening, then go ahead and just let it dry. You can come back and brighten it up with another layer, but once it's started to mix through the layers, once that moisture has got into that colour underneath, you can't fix it by adding more paint. Believe me, I have tried. It's a hard lesson to learn that if you keep adding more paint, the thing just keeps getting worse. So if you do see any mixing, any time that you're layering with gouache, go ahead and let it dry before you come back to it. So around our lantern, we're going to give it a little bit of a frame, and we're going to take that nice warm yellow that we've created here and add a little bit of burnt sienna. For a rich, paler brown. And this we can just trail around the edge. Of our lantern. And we can also add a couple of lines over the top for like the frame around the glass. So a little line down either side. And the liner brush is definitely the easiest to do that with. I'm not going to do anything to the bottom of the lantern, but we can give the top a little bit of a cap. Maybe a little ball on top of there. And I'm going to grab a little bit of this darker brown and attach it to the tree here with that. That brown's also good for sort of darkening up the very top of the cap there, where the light's not quite reaching. So in the center of the lantern, we can brighten up the middle with a bit of white. Same rules again here. We want to get this done in as few strokes as possible to avoid blending or lifting any of that green from underneath. So you want quite a nice dry mixture. You want a dry brush, dry everything. And then just a little bit of paint, and I'm just going to dot this on just in this middle section, just some little dots. So I'm not even disturbing the paint with strokes really. I'm just lightly dotting it on just to create an area that's a little brighter. And then leave it alone. If you want more brightness, we'll come back and add another layer. We really don't want to lift that green through. But while we give that a second to dry, let's add a little bit of this illumination on the tree around it. Okay. So for that, we want these nice warm tones. So we'll take a little bit of the golden yellow that we've mixed here. I'm going to add just a little bit more white, and I'm going to mix in a little of this burnt sienna. So we end up with this like pale, warm brownie colour. And we want to add this to any surface where that light is catching. So we're going to add it just on this edge underneath here. Oh, I'm going to put a little bit more white in that. And a little bit more yellow, why not? Sometimes it's a bit of a dance to find the exact right shade. So it's the same mixture, just with a little bit more white, a little bit more yellow, a little bit of brown. We want this nice golden brown shade. Because we want to be able to see that lovely light that this is casting. And I'm going to add some on this bright spot here too. Just using, I've splayed the brush apart and as I've loaded it so that we get this nice texture when we add the colour. We don't have to do that, but higher up on this spot here is a good spot to do that. And then I'm going to bring some of this warmth down onto the trunk here. And I like this to be a little bit textured because this light would be picking up that texture of the bark. I'm just going to pop maybe a little bit more white in there. And just pop a little down here on that edge of the stump. So everything's a little bit more glowy. We've got some of that golden light from our lantern. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add another layer of white on that bright spot in the light now that it's dried. Just a little bit on the tip of the brush. Same again, just over this same area. Again, take your time, don't over fuss the paint, and if you decide it needs a little bit of blending once you've added the colour, let it dry first. Many a painting has been ruined by impatience. So we have our lantern there, apart from a little bit of blending that we'll do in a moment once it's dried. We can go ahead and start on the base of our snow globe now, and for this we want the browns again. For a wooden base, I'm going to add a little bit more brown here on the palette. And of course you could do this, you could make a snow globe with any kind of wintry scene that you want. But if you do try something, do something that is simple. I try and split scenes up into a background, a middle ground and a foreground. And in this here we kind of have a background and a foreground. Well, that's because we've actually got 3 layers. We've got the background is the background that we added. Our middle ground is our trees and the lantern here, because our foreground is the globe itself. And splitting it up like this helps to avoid making something that's a little bit too complicated. I'm going to take, for the base here, the burnt sienna, a little bit of the Prussian blue. I'm just going to fill in this main section first. Just as tidy as you can. And then I'm going to fill in this bottom section, but I'm only going to do the very bottom bit dark, because I want to create the separation here with the different parts of this. So I'm just going to fill this, like the bottom half of this in with the dark brown. And then we can add a little bit of lighter tones to the top. And I'm going to take a little bit of white, and I'm going to use some of these little bits of warmer colours that I've got on the palette here. Doesn't really matter what, if it's more orangey or if it's more yellow. Just so we get a slightly different brown. And we're going to run that across the top here too. Being as tidy as I can be up against the bottom edge of the globe. Doesn't matter if it's not super perfect, because we are going to add just a little bit of snow in the bottom of the globe here. But just as tidy as you can be. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the dark brown, so the Prussian blue and the burnt sienna. And just pop that there. And I'm going to switch to a smaller brush, because painting these tiny spaces with this big brush is a nuisance. I'm switching to the round brush, and I'm just going to blend those where I've added the two different shades together. Just take a clean damp brush and run them across. Get everything to blend together a little. If your paint gets thin when you're blending like this, just stick a bit more paint on the page. I've got a little bit of a thin spot down this bottom corner. I'm just going to add an extra bit of paint down there. This is a nice dark mixture, so I'm going to tuck that underneath that top rib on on this center section too. So just blend that light and dark together. You can't go wrong with this, just follow that curve across and just let it mix together. And then if you've got any white spots left, just fill them in with whatever the closest colour is. Or if you need to tidy up any lines, it's easier to do with this smaller brush. Across the base here, I'm just going to add a little star motif. And for that, I'm going to break out a little bit of primary blue. Next to the Prussian blue, this gives a beautiful vibrancy. Almost makes it feel like it's glowing. I'm going to take a little bit of the blue, a little bit of white, almost like a bright sky blue colour. Make sure that your base is dry. And then we're just going to add a fancy snowflake or two across the bottom here. Add a little bit more blue to that. And it can be as simple or as elaborate as you like. And I'm going to add just a couple on either side. So a little cross with an accent. And then I think just some snowy spots. And then to make these nice and glowy, we're going to trace around these shapes with the blue. So take just a little bit of the straight primary blue on the brush, on your liner, and just trace around really carefully. Just adding a thin line of that bright blue. You You want just enough water in this to get your paint to leave the brush. If you're working with a blue that's not quite as vibrant, take just a tiny bit of white and add that in with your blue just to lift it. But we don't want to kill that vibrancy. Just tracing around, and it's easier to trace around the little spots. And then you're just going to take just a tiny touch of white and add that to the very center. This is going to be a super light touch. You want a nice skinny line. You want enough white in this mixture that your paint will leave your brush and make a fine line, but not so much that it dries less transparent, like more transparently. So just enough moisture to get it workable on the brush. And then we're going to add, make sure all your little pale blue is dry. And we're just going to add the same shape but to the very center and smaller. So in the spots, we're just going to add a little dot. And then just trace over your little snowflakes. Letting a little of that light blue and a little of that blue around the edge show through. It's just a super light touch. So everything up the top here is dry now, even our little lantern. If you do find that the spots that you added here in the lantern, if they're a little textured, you can go ahead and blend them out now as long as they're dry. But you want a really, really dry brush. You want to wet that brush and squeeze all that extra moisture out and just pat at the dots ever so slightly if they need to blend out. Mine actually didn't turn out too bad, they're not too textured, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave them as they are. And I'm going to add a little bit of snow settling on the top of my lantern. Right there. I'm going to take my larger round brush and I'm just going to pop in, you know, in snow globes, before you shake them up, they get that bit of snow that's all settled in the bottom. We'll add that down this bottom edge. So we want a clean brush because we're going to add the white here. And for this we want to curve it up the glass and then just fill in this bottom section with this little drift of snow. And I don't worry too much if a little of that colour underneath mixes in, because that's your shadowy colour for your snow anyway. I'm just going to take a little bit of the brown where I've painted over the edge here. And we're about ready to paint our background. We're just going to do one last thing, and that is to add a sprinkle of snow. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to grab a bit of scrap paper and just cover that at the bottom there. And for our snow we want a pretty watery white mixture. I'm saturating the round brush here, so there's plenty of paint in there, and then just take another brush and tap it on the handle so you get a little sprinkle of snow, like we've just shook up our globe. Okay, so we're ready to paint our background, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a bit of space on my palette here so that I can mix up the colour for the background. And the background, we're just going to do like a dark blue, so a bit of your Prussian blue. You can add a little bit of black if you want it to be really nice and dark. At the bottom we're just going to lighten it a little bit. But before we do that, if you've got a template that you made, go ahead and pop it over, make sure your snow's dry, pop it over and just redraw your pencil line around the outside. It's going to make it easier if you've got a line to follow when it comes to painting the background. I actually drew mine with a compass, so I'm just going to go ahead and just remark that line just so we've got a guide, so we can make our globe as round as we can. I'm going to clean off my big brush and I'm going to scoop out all of this Prussian blue. In fact, I'm going to add a little bit of, I've got that green still in the palette, I'm going to pop some of that green in Not enough to make it sort of teal coloured, but enough to, it'll darken that blue up. It gives it a lovely deep blue right before it turns to turquoise or like a dark teal. And then you're going to paint around your snow globe as carefully as you can. If you struggle with a steady hand, I would recommend painting up to just a little bit away with your larger brush, and then just finishing off next to your globe, perhaps with a smaller brush that is a little easier to handle. And just as tidy as you can. I'm just going to paint down to the bottom of the globe there and just around that top, because I'm going to lighten up the blue at the bottom of the page. When you're painting something like this, you'll find that there's a certain position that your hand is most comfortable in, and it's much easier if you can turn your work to keep your hand in that comfortable position. If you do get a few little bits that go in, it doesn't matter too much. We can take a clean damp brush, and because we've got so much white in those background colours, we can tidy that edge up without too much bother. I'm just going to take a little bit more paint. I find it easiest to paint tidy lines like this when I'm holding my breath, which is fine. The lines are much better, but I have to kind of dance back and forth between painting the larger open areas where I can breathe. Otherwise it makes me ever so lightheaded. But remarking that that pencil line around the outside of the dome really helps. To get the shape as tidy as you can. I suppose if you really wanted to cheat with this and you didn't want to have to paint around it at the end here, you could go ahead and cut this out. It'd still look cute cut out. Then you wouldn't have to paint around the edge like this. And this worked out pretty good. This page is, apart from the back one that's stuck down, this is the last page in my sketchbook, and it'll probably be the last painting of the year. So this bit down the bottom of the page, we're just going to mix in a little bit of white. And bring this up to your dark. And just blend them together with a few horizontal strokes. Just taking the excess paint out of that, or most of it, and then just going over that blend. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so if you've got any little bits around your globe that have got a wobbly line, take your round brush, and you want it to be clean and well dried. And then if you can see, I've got one little bit here, and if you just use the tip of the brush just to fuss ever so slightly, you can just push that mark back. We want to give our snow globe a reflection in the glass, and we're going to take a little bit of white to do that. We want this white to be a little bit watered down so it dries not super opaque. So I've just mixed a bit of extra water in there, and just it's loaded into my brush quite nicely. And then we're going to add a rectangular sweep down this left side, just following the curve of the glass. And then making a second pass to make it more rectangular shaped. So we get this this glassy highlight, but that we can still see those details through. Let it dry. Once it's dried, you can see if it needs a little bit of touching up. And now we're going to take the shield that we've used and we're going to make the outside of the glass a little bit more opaque. So you want your fluffy brush for this, and we want to just clean a little bit of that excess paint that's on there. And the nice thing about a fluffy brush is they work best when they're dry, but they really want to stay dry, so we can clean them out pretty easily. I'm going to go ahead and just dip it into the water, and it's good and wet here, if you can see. That's nice and fully saturated, just so I can work out the excess pigment on my paper towel. I'm just going to take out as much of that colour as getting there, and then we can scrub it on a paper towel to dry it, and they dry really well if you give them a good scrub on a clean dry paper towel. And just like that, it's pretty much like new. I'm gonna just clean a little space on the palette here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the white and we're gonna spread it out into a thin layer on the palette. With a different brush. Doesn't matter if it's your wide flat or if it's your filbert. I'm going to use the filbert because that brush is so blue. Any clean brush. I'm going to take a bit of white. Like I say, we're going to spread it out on the palette. So we've got a fairly thin layer. Now this is a thick mixture. This has got no white, no extra white added. No extra water added, sorry. Just spread it out pretty thin. And we're going to dip just the tip of these bristles into it. And as long as all this is dry, we're going to use this to add, you can see just a tiny bit of white in the bristles, and this will dry really quickly. And we're going to use that tiny little bit of texture to just make the edge of the globe a little cloudy. You're using your shield to keep it off your background. And just working it into the page. And you need a very light touch. This doesn't create lots of texture all at once, which is really nice. It means that we can build it up in layers. Makes it a little easier to control. Just scrubbing it back and forth. I'm just going to take a little bit more white. If you don't want to do this, or if you don't have a fluffy mop brush, you can do it with a white charcoal pencil and just really lightly run over the surface around the edge. Well, like I say, if you don't have one of these fluffy mop brushes, then get one, they're great. Or if you have a If you have an old eyeshadow brush or something like that, then that will work just as well. If you're worried about going straight from the palette to the page with this because you're not sure what result you're going to get, if you get a piece of coloured paper or a piece of cardboard or something like that, you can just try it on that first. Anything that's not white, obviously if you do it on white paper you won't see it, but if you go on a little bit of coloured paper you can see how it's gonna turn out, and that can help. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a haze around the edge, and now I'm just going to take my white charcoal pencil and I'm just going to create a bright white line around the edge. You don't have to do this, or you can do it with a paintbrush if you like. I find it's a little easier just to go in and do it with my charcoal pencil. Just brightening up that outer edge. To give that globe a nice crispy edge. And for a final touch, again, this is an optional one too, you can add a sprinkle of stars to your background. Maybe they're stars, maybe they're glistening snow, who knows. And these, instead of flicking these on, I'm gonna add some bigger dots. You can also use your white charcoal pencil to give a few of these a little bit of a light flare. You can also do this with a brush. It's just an easy touch with the charcoal pencil. For a few little extra glistens. Give them a few little glowy spots and pop some white back in the centre. And at that, we'll call this pretty snow globe done. I hope you have enjoyed this. If you have any questions or anything that I can answer, I am happy to do that. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you give this a go, or if you've painted along, then if you share it, do tag me, because I would love to see. I will, if you came to the live late or missed any part of it, I will go ahead and leave this up on YouTube on the channel so you can watch at your leisure. Oh, here we go. Okay. Do you ever use masking fluid? I don't with gouache, no. I used to use it with watercolour, and I loved it. But when I switched to gouache, I stopped using it. And one thing that I will say is now when I pull out the watercolour paintings that I used masking fluid on, the paper has turned yellow where that masking fluid was. And this was supposed to be a really nice acid-free, paper stable masking fluid. So that was a good lesson for me, is just don't. And I generally find that the opacity of gouache is good enough that if I want stuff white or light colours, I can layer it up over the top. That being said, if I do need to mask, I will do it with tape. I love tape. What's it called? Oh, the Scotch Magic tape is just phenomenal. It's really nice to use with gouache. So if you do need to do any masking, I definitely recommend that. Okay. Okay, I'm going to sign off there, and thank you so much everybody for joining me today. It has been a pleasure to spend this Saturday afternoon with you, or Saturday morning or evening, wherever you are. And like I say, I very much look forward to seeing your painting. I hope you guys have a happy new year, and I shall see you soon.